Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum's live virtual programming, High Flying Design. My name is Karen. I'm a museum educator at the Intrepid Museum located in New York City, and I will be leading you through this program today. Just as a reminder, the museum's live streams are free, but if you'd like to support us in delivering this amazing content, please click on the link in the comments. Now, today we're going to be discussing aviation and how airplanes and objects actually get off the ground, stay in the air, and land back down safely. So at the end of our program today, we're going to have a quick, short activity. If you want to grab a piece of paper, just something nice and rectangle, doesn't have to be anything special. Like I said, just a nice rectangle. And just a pair of scissors. If you're not allowed to use scissors, that's totally okay. You can just rip your paper as well. Now, feel free to say hello, use the chat, tell us where you're tuning in from, and feel free to ask questions throughout the program. Again, my name is Kara, and I'm an educator at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, where our mission is to honor our heroes, educate the public, and inspire the youth. So just a quick introduction on where I'm tuning in from. This is the Intrepid Museum. It is located on the west side of Manhattan on the Hudson River, right in between New Jersey and New York. Our museum is housed inside of a historic World War II aircraft carrier, the USS Intrepid. Cool news, a couple of things about the Intrepid. It's about 913 feet long. If you're going to take the Intrepid, turn it on its side, it'd be as tall as a New York City skyscraper. You could also play 3 games of football on there at the same time. 3 football fields fit up there. Laying back down, if you were to measure it from the top of its point to the lowest, it's about 8 stories tall. Now, the construction for the Intrepid began in 1943 when the U.S. was sent into World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The Intrepid served during World War II, the Vietnam War, and the Cold War, but also served as a recovery vessel for NASA. Now, at this time, it was very impractical and very difficult to send planes from the U.S. all across the ocean. So vessels like the Intrepid were built to carry those aircrafts and have them launch and land like a floating airport. Now, what would you call a vessel that's built to carry aircrafts? Tell me in the chat. Something that might carry those airplanes or aircrafts along the ocean. Alrighty, friends. So if you said an aircraft carrier, you would be correct. Now, like I was saying, not only did the Intrepid carry those aircrafts, but they also had to launch, take off on their missions, and land back on the Intrepid. Yeah, I see a lot of us are saying aircraft carrier in the chat. Now, the Intrepid served from 1943 to 1974 and became the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in 1982. So let's take a look at what that museum looks like today. So our first stop is going to be at our chairs exhibit. Now, you're probably thinking, chairs in a museum? But these chairs actually tell a really great story about what life would have been like aboard the USS Intrepid. And I'll zoom in for a little bit. There we go. Now, if you take a quick look at all of these different chairs, can anybody tell me the chair that they think is the most boring chair? Just a plain old chair. Tell me in the comments what you think is the most boring chair out of this set of chairs. Awesome. So I see some of us are saying the green chair, right? It might be the first chair on your screen. The green chair looks like it's just a boring old chair. Now, this chair was all around the Intrepid. This was just an ordinary office chair, just used for sitting, but a lot of thought went into the design of this green chair. It had to be light enough that you could move it around the Intrepid, but it also had to be heavy enough to withstand the rocking of the Intrepid, right? Because it's a ship. Might have those waves that rocks the ship around. You don't want that chair also moving around the Intrepid. So it'd have to have a little bit of weight to it. Moving on to our next chair. Does anybody see one that looks really comfortable that you'd want to lounge on, maybe put your feet up, watch a movie, get cozy on a rainy day? Let me know in the chat which chair you think is the coziest one. If you said the brown chairs there, you would have been on the same train of thought as me. That chair looks very comfortable. Yeah, I see Trent said the brown ones look really comfortable. Yeah, so those were actually chairs that you would find in the pilot ready room. So as you can see, these pilots are in this room, and basically what would happen is they would get their assignments or their missions. I like to think of it like homework, and they'd learn about all the things that they were about to go do on their missions. And these chairs would be really comfortable in there. Now going back to our chairs, does anybody see a chair that looks a little intimidating? Maybe a little scary? Something with a lot of pieces to it, a lot of wires, maybe made out of metal? Yeah, and I see somebody said that green and brown chair might be the second chair, right? And that's actually an ejection seat. It might look a little something like this. So basically, that chair was loaded with a mini explosive underneath it. And if a pilot got in a bind or something happened to their airplane, they would need to shoot and make a quick exit out of that airplane. So you could see that on the top part of the chair, there's that yellow and black handle. There's also one located in between the pilot's legs that you could pull, and it would launch you out of that airplane. So this pilot went to the ready room and used the ready room chairs, learned his assignment. Then he got in his plane, maybe he got in a bind and had to shoot out of his airplane. The next safest place to land would probably be the water if he was taking off from the Intrepid. So he's hanging out in the water, he's waiting for somebody to come pick him up, but the Intrepid is really far. So instead, another ship comes and picks him up, but he's got to get back to the Intrepid. Does anybody see a chair that could help him get from one ship back to the Intrepid? Any one of these chairs that can maybe help him get from the ship back to Intrepid? Awesome. Now I saw somebody say the white chair at the very end. And that, my friends, is the Highline Chair. Really cool thing about the Highline Chair is that it would be attached to one ship. You'd put a cable through that little circle at the top, and a pulley system would actually take you back to the Intrepid. Now remember, this is very, very difficult. You've got waves moving both of those ships. You've got to be at the same speed as the other ship because you don't want to pull that line, right? But sailors are pranksters, and a couple of cool stories that I have about that was one time this pilot got picked up, right? He needed to get back to the Intrepid. And the Intrepid was known for having ice cream. So the ship held the pilot at ransom and said, "We'll take some ice cream if you want your pilot back." So Intrepid said, "Yeah, no problem." So they sent over some ice cream, but weighed it down with soap shavings. Ugh, right? So when the guys found out that their ice cream was mixed with soap, they decided to move that ship a little closer, dunk that pilot in the water, and get him a little bit soaked. Personally, I feel bad for that pilot because I don't think it was his fault that soap got sent over. So now that we've talked a little bit about this chairs exhibit, does anybody have any questions? And I'll pop myself back up here. Any questions about anything we've talked about? How many people served on the Intrepid? Great question. So about 3,000 men served aboard the Intrepid. They were anywhere from 18 to 23 years old was the average age. And for the first time, these men were leaving their homes and coming aboard the Intrepid. So it was a really big deal. Remember, at the time, there wasn't cell phones or email. They'd have to send their letters back through snail mail. So it was a really tough time for these men to be aboard the Intrepid. Good question. Oh, what is the green and black chair at the far end? So I'll actually pop that chair back up. And we can see it right here. So does anybody recognize that chair? Tell me in the chat if you've ever seen that chair. I'll give you a hint. It wasn't just on the Intrepid. So that, my friends, is a dentist chair. Now, like I said, there was 3,000 men aboard the Intrepid, and the Intrepid was kind of like a city at sea. Everything that you would have in your community, you would have on board of Intrepid as well. So dentists, right? These men were serving from anywhere from 6 to 9 months. That's enough time to get maybe a toothache or definitely get a cleaning. There were also doctors on board. There were chefs. There were bakers, there was mechanics. So basically anything in your community that you would have there, you would also have on the ship. A city at sea. Good question. Alrighty, friends. So we're going to move on. And at the beginning of this, I did talk about that we were going to mention airplanes. Our program is called High Flying Design. So I'm going to take us back into the museum, and we're going to look at this beautiful bird right here. Now this, my friends, is the Grumman TBM Avenger. And this was one of the primary planes used during World War II. Now this is the oldest plane in our collection at the museum, and its main purpose was to drop that 2,000-pound torpedo that you can see underneath in the belly of that plane. Now, does anybody see anything particular about this plane? I know there's a lot of things going on, but anything that you just think is a little bit out of the ordinary? Tell me in the chat what you think. Anything weird about it? When you look at airplanes, do they always look like this? Oh, so I see somebody mentioned the prop at the front, or the propeller. We'll get to that in just a second. But I also see somebody mentioned the wing. Thanks, Trent. Yeah, the wing is a little bit funky. Now, most people think that they are broken, but they're actually just folded. These wings would go really far out, and in a museum or on a ship, right, just in general during World War II, this wingspan was about 54 feet long. So if you were to take your arms and you were to extend them and kind of do a circle motion, you're probably hitting your wall like I am, or you're running into other objects. But if you take your airplane wings and you kind of fold them in like this, you're less likely to hit something. Same thing with the Avenger. It was able to fold its wings inward and back so that it didn't hit a lot of things around in the area. Now, like I mentioned, this airplane was no small bird. Its wingspan went about 54 feet long, and its top speed was about 276 miles per hour. So it was huge, and it didn't go very fast. It also weighed about 18,000 pounds. So you've got this huge, bulky machine somehow getting off the ground, staying up in the air, and also had to land back down safely. Now, this plane had a very interesting and silly nickname. It's known as the Turkey, because turkeys are kind of clunky like that too, right? And they also fold their wings back. So again, knowing all these crazy specs about this airplane, how does it get off the ground? How does it safely take off, stay in the air, and land? Well, my friends, so aside from the wheels and the wings, we also have some other things that are coming into play. Our 4 forces of flight. Now, I already saw somebody mention it. I think it was Trent said that in the front we've got this propeller, right? But propellers aren't also just on planes. You can also find them on ships. The Intrepid had propellers just like this one, and they're huge. And basically the way propellers work is if you were going to go for a swim, right? Some of us might swim like this, some of us might swim like this, but either way, you're cupping that water and you're pushing it backwards. Same thing happens with the propellers on a ship. They scoop that water around, they push that water back, helping that aircraft carrier move forward. Now, the same thing happens with airplane propellers. Now, air kind of works like a fluid or like water in that it flows. If you take a big breath in and you blow it out, you're creating a nice stream of air that flows like a fluid. Now, not to be confused with a liquid. Air is not a liquid, but it has properties of a fluid because it flows. Now, like I said, the same thing happens with those propellers. As those propellers move, they scoop that air, pushing that air backwards and causing our airplane to go forward. And that, my friends, is what we call thrust, right? Now you're probably thinking, but Kara, I've seen lots of airplanes and not all of them have propellers. So how are they creating thrust? Well, you've probably seen an airplane like this one. And can anybody tell me what type of airplane this is or what it has that helps it give that thrust? Let me know in the chat if you know what this is called or what type of plane this is called. You might have seen it on a runway at an airport. Maybe you've ridden one like this. Maybe not this one exactly, but at an airport when you've taken off, it's got the same kind of engine. And if you said jet engine, you'd be correct. Right? So airplanes like this generate thrust a little bit differently. These airplanes take in a big gulp of air. Basically, they suck in a bunch of air. That air moves down the belly of the jet. It mixes with a bunch of jet fuel. It's compressed, then it's lit on fire, and it's blasted out the back of the airplane, causing it to give it that thrust and move in that forward direction. So it just has thrust, it's just generated a little bit differently with that ignition out of the back of the airplane. So we talked a little bit about how thrust is that force that pushes us forward. But what's the force that holds us back? Can anybody tell me the force that holds an airplane back? Maybe if you were going to go running and you're feeling something on your face holding you back, what would you call that? If you said drag, you would be correct. Drag is generated by the interaction of a solid body, which in this case is our airplane, and a fluid, which is air. So as that air is hitting the front of that airplane, it's creating a lot of drag. And the bigger the airplane, the more surface area, the more drag it's going to create. And you can create a little bit of drag yourself. Like I said, if you wanted to go outside and go take a really quick run, you'd feel that wind in your face. But if you're sitting here and you want to create drag, you can just put your hand out like this and just wave it back and forth very quickly. All that air hitting on your hand is drag. Now, if you wanted to test it out a little bit differently, put your hand this way and go back and forth and see which direction you feel more air or more drag. So just a quick recap. That force that pushes us forward is thrust. That force that holds us back is drag, or that, in this case, that air resistance. Now, since I mentioned earlier about how the Avenger is very bulky, it's very heavy, especially having those wings that have all those extra pieces in them to help them fold backward, adds a lot of weight and a lot of mass. And it's a little bit harder to get off the ground when you've got our next force pushing down on that big airplane. Can anybody tell me that force that holds us down to the ground might be pushing on this airplane, making it hard for it to get off the ground? Let me know in the chat if you know that force that's pushing down on us and holding us down, keeps us from floating away. So if you said gravity, you would be correct. Gravity is that force that is holding us down. It's keeping those airplanes from getting off the ground. Yeah, Tron, I saw you say gravity. So gravity in the case of an airplane, be nice if we had less gravity so it could get off the ground a little bit easier. But it also helps us stay on the ground and keeps us from floating away. So gravity is really great for humans, right? You're not going to float away off your chair as you're walking around outside. Now, gravity is the force that holds us down to the ground. But what's the force that we need to get us off the ground? Anybody know that last force, our fourth force, that could get us off the ground? So if you were to walk around this plane, we were talking about it earlier, called the Fury, you might notice something very particular about it. Aside from its folded wings, we've got a nice cross section there of the inside of the wings, right? And then there's this very particular shape, and that shape is called an airfoil. The airfoil helps manipulate the air a certain way to create that lift and get the airplane off the ground. Now, back in the 1700s, there was this man named Daniel Bernoulli, and Daniel Bernoulli studied how air worked like a fluid, right? We've talked about that a couple times already today, and he found that as air moves, the faster that air is, the lower the pressure, and the slower the air moves, the higher the pressure. So as you take a look at this airplane wing, there we go. As we take a look at this airplane wing, you can see that the airflow is going over this special shape, this airfoil. I like to say it looks like a teardrop or a eyebrow, right? That air is going over, and it's split in two over that airfoil. You've got air on top and air on bottom. Now that air on top is moving really, really fast, causing an area of low pressure. The air on bottom is moving a little bit slower, creating high pressure. Now, high pressure always wants to get to the low pressure. It kind of gets jealous. But that pressure can't move through the metal, so it actually lifts it up trying to get there. Now, think of it kind of like if you were waiting in this super long line for your favorite snack, right? And there's a whole bunch of people ahead of you. The line next door opens up, and they're now selling your favorite snack. What are you going to do? You're probably going to run over to the next line, but so is everybody else. Just like that high pressure is trying to move to that low pressure. Right? Now, Daniel Bernoulli is not the only name that we can throw around when talking about getting and generating lift. We also have Sir Isaac Newton. And some of us have probably heard of Newton before, right? He is the father of modern physics, destroyer of GPAs, right? And Newton's third law of motion goes into play here with this airfoil. Right? For every action, there is an equal but opposite reaction. So just as air is moving over that airfoil, it's actually being deflected downwards, causing our wing to go upwards. So you've got Daniel Bernoulli and Isaac Newton's principles coming into play here. So now that we've been able to put all of our four forces into play, and we've talked about how we've got our lift, our gravity, we've got our thrust, and our drag, I want us to look at those two airplanes that we've been talking about. We've got the Avenger on the left and the Fury on the right. Now, which plane do you think goes faster? Tell me in the chat which plane you think is a little bit faster based on maybe the amount of drag, the thrust that each one produces, the amount of gravity that's holding it down. Tell me which one you think goes faster. So I see a couple of us say plane number 2, the Fury. You would be correct. The Avenger only goes about 276 miles per hour, where the Fury goes 681 miles per hour. So almost 3 times as much. So, pilots don't just fly using their propellers and their wings and the 4 forces, but once you're actually up in the air, you've got to turn, you've got to roll, you've got to do some cool maneuvers, right? And that takes us to our control surfaces, and those are all those really neat flaps on the back of airplanes and on the sides of airplanes that control the airplane's movements. So as we take a look at this particular piece of the wing called the aileron, it's French for little wing, that piece actually controls the roll. It controls the airplane's movement to go back and forth, kind of if you were going to roll down a hill or you've seen your animal rolling around in the carpet. As we move to the tail end of this airplane, you see those things called the elevators, and they control pitch. And just like an elevator maybe in your building or in a building that you've been in, that elevator controls the up and down motion. Now that big yellow piece right there is called the rudder. And just like a boat has a rudder, an airplane has a rudder, and it controls that side-to-side motion. Awesome, friends. So now that we've talked about these 4 horses and the control surfaces, does anybody have any questions? Ooh, how many airplanes fit on Intrepid? Good question. So at any time, the Intrepid could hold about 100 airplanes between the flight deck and the hangar deck. And the hangar deck is where we saw the Fury and the Avenger. That was kind of like the garage of the Intrepid. So when they weren't being used on the top of the flight deck, they were being housed or repaired in that hangar deck area. Good question. Are Avengers still flown in the Navy today? So no, unfortunately, Avengers are not flown by the Navy today. They're very old. Technology has advanced a lot, but Avengers are still used, whether they're owned by private owners or in museums. I've read a lot about how Avengers have been used to put out forest fires because they have so much space in that belly where the torpedo went. They can actually hold water, enough water to put out forest fires. Great question. So we've talked a little bit about what it takes to get those airplanes off the ground, and we discussed in the very beginning about how Intrepid's kind of like a floating airport. Now, when we think of airports, airports have thousands of feet of runway, but the Intrepid's flight deck was only about 913 feet long, and of that 913 feet, 250 of it is used to launch airplanes. So not a lot of space. The Intrepid had these steam catapults, and basically steam was generated in the engine of Intrepid, compressed, and what would happen is these airplanes would basically be slingshotted off of the top of Intrepid, called the cat shot. And they would go about 0 to 150 miles per hour in just 2 seconds. So it was very fast in just a short amount of time. Now, landing on Intrepid was just as difficult as launching. And if you can see on the right-hand picture here of this airplane, you can see that there's this hook. It's called a tail hook, and that would be found at the bottom and back end of the airplane. On here, it's red and black. And on the other picture, you can see that tail hook coming down, because what would happen is as that plane was coming in for a landing, there'd be 5 arresting cables stretched out across the flight deck. Now, the job of that pilot was to put down that hook and attempt to try and grab one of those arresting cables and bring it to a full stop. It was very, very hard to do. They would come in and forgot to mention, the Intrepid was also going about 40 miles per hour at this time. So the Intrepid's moving, you've also got waves, it's rocking back and forth, and these pilots are trying to land on board as well. And so here's another picture. As you can see, that tail hook coming down. It's a little bit difficult, but there's that arresting cable that it's managed to hook onto. Now, as we go on to a different type of aircraft here, we've got helicopters. Now, helicopters are really special in that they can do a vertical takeoff and landing, which means they can just take off, moving up and down. They don't really need a runway like most airplanes do. What's really neat is they've got these rotors on the top and they've got rotors on the back. And that airfoil shape can also be found on these rotors as well. This particular helicopter is called the Sea Guard, and it's red and white and blue because it's a rescue helicopter. So if you were out in the ocean or in the water and you needed rescuing, this helicopter would come and rescue you. You can see there's that little basket that would go down, scoop you up, and bring you back inside the helicopter. But the best thing, or the coolest thing I think about this helicopter, is it can actually land on water. It's basically got these tanks on the side of it that are flotation devices. They're kind of like buoys that help that helicopter land on the water. So it's a really neat airplane. Now, speaking of vertical takeoff and landings, we've got our Harrier Jet at the museum as well. It's a little hard to see, but the jet actually has these, I like to call them gills on the side, but they're actually vents. And those vents can be turned downward to create that thrust to help it go up. And also vertical takeoff and land. So it's kind of like a hybrid between a helicopter and an airplane or a jet airplane. Now, what's really neat about this as well is at fully loaded with all its weapons, this Harrier jet cannot vertically take off and land. It actually needs a little bit of a runway. It's also more efficient on its gas if it uses a runway rather than using VTOL. One of our other really cool planes in our collection is the A12. And just by looking at this plane and thinking about all the four forces that we have talked about today, how do you think its design helps it fly? What about it helps it fly? Or what do you think it does? Or how fast do you think it goes? Just based on the shape and all of the four forces that we talked about today. How does its shape help it fly, and how fast might it go? So if you think that this airplane goes really fast, you'd be correct. This is the fastest airplane in the entire world. Looking at its body shape, it is very aerodynamic. It is very streamlined. It's actually a CIA spy plane. That's why it's painted black, because it was used to spy. Now, I did mention that this is a very, very fast plane. It went Mach 3, or 2,300 miles per hour, or basically 3 times the speed of sound. So this plane went super fast. Yeah, and I see Trent say it's very sleek, right? It's very thin, it's a very skinny plane. We know that it has a little bit of drag. It's not going to have a lot of that air hitting it in the face. On the side there, you can see its thrusters. It goes very, very, very fast. Alrighty, friends. So, any questions? Any questions that we might have? Oh, what happens if a pilot missed the cable for landing? So that is called a bolter. And basically, airplanes, when they're coming in to land on the Intrepid, are still coming in at full speed. They're not going to slow down as they come in for a landing. They're going to be coming in at full speed. And if they miss one of those 5 arrestor cables, they actually had to keep going, turn around, and try again. Good question. Oh, do we still use propeller planes? So propeller planes are still in use, but mostly owned by private owners. They're also very cool to have. We don't use them, obviously, if we're going to go fight in war or anything like that, but a lot of private owners still have them, and museums as well. They're also they're more cost efficient to have too, because they use less fuel. Good question. Alrighty, friends. So I did mention at the beginning of our program that if you wanted to grab a sheet of paper, I'll give you a couple more seconds to grab just a regular old sheet of paper. Make sure it doesn't have a homework assignment on it or anything like that, right? Because we are going to be folding it and we are going to be cutting it. So if you have a pair of scissors, you can use those. If you're not allowed to use scissors, then we can just use our fingers to cut it as well, or rivets. Awesome. And I also see Trent commented on our A12, how it was used for spying. Yeah, it was painted black so that it could fly at night and spy. Alrighty, friends. So we are going to go ahead and start creating our paper airplane. Now you should just have a nice sheet of paper just like this one. And what I want us to do is we're just going to fold that in half, kind of like this, or hot dog style. Hope everybody had lunch, right? We're just going to fold it hot dog style, just like this. Give it a nice crease in the middle, make it nice and symmetrical. Nice folded hot dog style, just like that. Okay, so make it nice and symmetrical. It's just going to give us a nice line to work with right now. Awesome. So what we're going to do next is we're going to create kind of like a roof. It's going to look kind of like a house. And you're going to take this top corner and you're just going to bring it to the center, just like this. So you're basically going to line up this top part with the center of your paper. Just like this. And I'm holding it up, but if you need to use the table, go for it. Just like this. And we are also going to do the other side. So if you want to go ahead and make sure that your top part is lined up with that middle section, you can go ahead and do that as well. So like I said, it's going to create kind of like a roof on our paper, just like that. We're going to have that nice middle part to work with as well. Mine's not very sharp, but hopefully yours is at home. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take that outer part and we're just going to connect it to the middle once again. Just like this, fold it in and make sure it's touching that center line. And I'm working with construction paper, so it's just a little bit harder to fold and crease. But just like this. So again, that side piece, that line is just going to fold in with our middle piece. And we're trying to make it as symmetrical as possible. Mine's a little off, but that's okay. So you should have something just like this, right? We went from having our house with a roof to folding those pieces in just like this. Awesome, my friends. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that middle line that we created earlier, and we're just going to fold in our airplane so that all of those folds are inside of our airplane, just like this. So you shouldn't see any folds. We're going to make sure that they're folded inside, just like this. Awesome. Now, we can't have a paper airplane without wings. So we've got to create some wings for our airplane. What we're going to do is we're going to take this top corner here and we're just going to fold it down until it gets to the corner. Just like that, just to give it some wings. So go ahead and fold that down, give it some nice wings. And you can go ahead and do that on both sides because you can't have an airplane with just one wing. There we go. So at this point, you should have something that looks just like this, right? Oh, mine's a little not symmetrical, but it should look something like this, right? Now, all the airplanes we looked at earlier have those control surfaces, right? The rudder, the ailerons, all of those pieces. So we're going to need some pieces like that as well. So if you'd like, you can toss your airplane right now, give it a good toss and see what it does. Does it make a loop? Does it turn left or right? Does it just go straight into the ground? Go ahead and toss it. If you want to tell me what it does in the chat, go for it. Awesome, friends. So if you've tossed it and you want to add some extra flair, those control surfaces, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to give our plane some elevators, right? Those are those pieces of the plane that help it go up and down. And all I did was I gave my airplane some good rips right here. Like I said, if you have scissors, you can use scissors. If not, your fingers work just as well. So your airplane's going to have these little pieces just like this. Now, you don't want to fold them all the way down. You just kind of want to let them sit there because you're going to want to change them later. You might want to put them down. See what happens if you toss your airplane in different directions. See what happens if those are face down. So don't fold them completely down. Just have them sitting there like that. Now, if you want to add a rudder, you can do that as well on the back of your plane, right? This is our nose and our tail end. You might want to add that rudder and see what happens after you toss it. Looks something like this. What would happen if we turned it the opposite direction? So experiment with it and see what kind of things that you can create. And you can let us know in the chat what happened if it did some cool maneuvers using its control surfaces. So friends, thank you so much for joining me today. The museum has introduced a number of live stream programs that you can find on our website at intrepidmuseum.org, or you can subscribe to this channel. Our next program is going to be Tuesday, April 13th at 3 p.m., Flying in Style. We're going to be talking a little bit about airplane art. And just as a reminder, the museum is now open to the public Thursdays through Sundays. If you enjoyed this program, we invite you to answer a quick survey located in the chat. Now, once again, my name is Kara, and thank you for joining me with Intrepid Adventures. See you next time.